Well, you see, the word responsible, it's in the word, response. Able. You have to be able to respond. Part of what moral responsibility is.
But it's the nature of the procession. If you proceed from the source that is a father, then you must be a son and an only son. It's the nature of a procession. Have you ever heard the word procession? Have you paid heed to the prefix pro in the word procession?
This is gonna be stuff like that.
But just to go even further beyond. This isn't even my final song.
I'll use myself as an example, and hopefully I'll be pretty quick here. The question I'll ask is, what do you believe about? What do you believe is the main source of answers for questions about ethics, specifically situational questions? So, like when Brett was bringing up specific scenarios where we might ask, well, what do we do here? What's the right thing to do? What is the source for those answers? Would be the question. And to quickly answer, I have a very, very simple one. I think that the Christian worldview provides God and His revelation as the source for these questions. Whenever I'm in a situation and the question is what I ought to do, what's the right thing to do in the situation, I think the answer can be found or reasoned from God's revelation, which is found in the Christian scriptures. So that would be my answer. I'd be curious to see, Sling, what you think about questions about morality and what it means to ask these questions and what it means to seek answers to them.
Well, the source of morality is always ourself, and I think that's demonstrated by the fact that different Christian denominations can't agree with each other on certain issues. I mean, if there was this objective moral standard, we wouldn't have all these arguments amongst believers. I mean, really, morality is subjective, unless you're going to take an approach like Sam Harris. Like Sam Harris, for example, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he says that we should define morality by what is eliminates suffering for the species, or what best reduces total suffering for the species. He would say that's what we should define as moral. And if in that case, yeah, I believe there can be an objective morality, but it's still ultimately up to us.
So that makes me curious. What do you mean then when we start talking about morality, when we start talking about questions of right and wrong? What does it mean when you say that it's determined by us? Do you mean that when we make the judgment, for example, stealing things is wrong? Do you mean that judgment is arbitrated by human beings, by us as a whole?
Well, yeah, society creates its own rules and laws. I mean, God. I'm not convinced that God has ever spoken to humans. I mean, all we have is the words of people who claim to speak on behalf of God. So, from where I stand, it's all just the word of one person against another.
Okay, suspending any talk on the question of revelation for a second. Let's just say that it is true that morality is a word which refers to certain social constructs, right? Because it's very clear that.
Sorry, can I elaborate? Sorry, I'd like to elaborate a little bit more, but there are certain rules that are not conducive to a successful society. I mean, a society that allows murder will not thrive. A society that allows theft will will not thrive, because human beings won't be motivated to work. You know, the laws by necessity need to be conducive to a successful society, and that's why we see moral behavior in animals. I mean, chimps aren't completely without morals. We see altruism in chimps. You know, we see them sacrificing themselves for the greater good of the population, and these behaviors allow them to be more successful as a species.
Okay, so there's a couple questions I would have. Thanks for that elaboration, by the way, because it clears up a lot of questions that I would originally ask. But my question would then be, Sling, what do you mean by successful here? Like when you say there are certain rules that are sort of preconditions for realizing a successful society. What does that mean? And
well, yeah, in that instance, by success, I was referring to survival, so the survival of the population itself, and also the quality of life for the individuals in the society.
okay, so survival and quality of life, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you mean by quality of life exactly?
Well, it's better if I'm not being, beaten up and robbed every day. So I'd rather live in a society where we don't allow that.
You would agree that that's a preferential judgment, though, right?
Obviously my preference is to not be beaten up and robbed, and I can assume that other people's preferences are pretty close to that as well. So I can put that together and say that, hey, society is about people coming together and saying, hey, if we don't beat up and rob each other, life is going to be better for all of us. So let's not do that. And that's the foundation for laws. That's where they come from.
But better here just means I like it, correct? For the statistical average of a society, it simply means that they're all agreeing this is awesome. I like this. This is great.
Pretty much, I suppose.
Okay. Let's suppose that is the case. Let's suppose that you're right, and when we talk about morality, and when we talk about situations where is it right to do this or is it right to do that? And we'll use a really non-controversial example. When we're in like, for example, Brett's chat room, and there were lots of interruptions going on, why do you think it's rational to say or excuse me, do you even think it's rational to say that it is a fact of the matter that people should not be interrupting each other? Or do you think it's rather that you don't like it, and therefore you appeal to your preferences when you say you shouldn't be doing that?
Oh, there is no ought unless you establish a standard. All right. So if my standard is we want to have a discussion where people are expressing their opinions equally and we're having an exchange of ideas, then by that standard, it's not good for people to interrupt each other. But if there's no standard or no goal, then I'd agree there is no rational reason to say that people shouldn't interrupt each other.
Okay, yeah, I would definitely agree with that. But wouldn't you agree that nothing about my arbitrating standards for the sake of any kind of social construct has anything to do with extra mental reality, right? And in the same way that when I say I like Coke, that doesn't have any effect on Coke itself. It doesn't have anything to do with the properties Coke has, except that perhaps they cause me to make that judgment. But other than that, they themselves the statement that I have a preference for the Coke doesn't have any correlation to some fact outside of my head that is the proposition Coke is good, or Coke is better than this, or I mean, not even Coke is to be preferred, or something like of that nature.
Sort of. I mean, I think that all value and all judgments are subjective, but there are objective things happening when you drink that Coke. Like, if you have Coke and you enjoy it, there are, you know, dopamine receptors and things that are objectively exist in reality. But yeah, as far as opinions about what is good, and, like, you know, is this a good movie or a bad movie, or that's just subjective.
Okay, so then I think that the problem then is that in any given situation where you have a moral question, like is it okay to interrupt people, all you can appeal to is your opinion, no?
Not if we establish that the goal is to have a discussion. If the goal is to have a discussion, then interrupting people is counterproductive to that, and that's an objective truth.
Right, but it would still just be your opinion that it's that we ought to be productive towards the conversation.
It's my opinion that we should have a discussion, but if we have all agreed to have a discussion, then it's objectively true that we should not interrupt each other.
So I would disagree. I would say it's necessary. It's a precondition for you not to interrupt each other in order for a discussion to occur.
That is not objective.
Well, hold on. It's necessary as a precondition for you all to agree on some standards, one of them being that you don't interrupt each other mercilessly in order for a conversation to obtain, a successful one anyways. But
right.
That doesn't have anything to do with oughts. That's still an is statement. Namely that it's necessary for XYZ that ABC occur.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there are any objective there is any objective ought unless we first create a standard or a goal. Once we create a standard or a goal that we're striving towards, then only then can you say what is objective in, you know, objectively best to reaching that goal.
Right, but what I'm saying is even that's not an ought. Even that's not an obligation or a prescription. It's merely a statement of condition. In other words, a precondition for me to talk to you is that I have a computer that allows me to do so. But that doesn't mean that if I want to realize the reality of me talking to you that I ought to use a computer. It just means that if I want to, it's necessary that I do so. That's still an is statement. It's not an ought statement.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think there are any objective oughts necessarily.
Right, but and I'm saying even if you agree to a given goal, there are still no oughts because you're simply pointing out preconditions, not prescriptions.
Well, you know, morality is usually dealing with human behavior. It's about what behaviors are good or bad, or what should and should not be done. And going back to the Sam Harris example, if we define morality as reducing human suffering, then it becomes objectively true that I should not torture, you know, people for my amusement.
Yeah, see, I would disagree. It would, if you define, if you define the avoidance of human suffering as a value,
Moral.
yeah, as a moral value, that means that a precondition of realizing that value is, for example, not interrupting someone in the middle of serious speech. But that doesn't mean that you actually ought to do that. Those are separate issues. In other words,
Well, if you want to have a discussion, then you ought not interrupt them. I mean, I feel that's a fair statement. But of course, you have to first have the opinion that we should be having a discussion. Yeah, I agree. I think we actually agree on this.
We don't, though, because what I'm pointing out is that there's an equivocation error going on. It's not fair to say, if I want to have a successful discussion, I ought not to interrupt you. If, when you use the word ought there, you're avoiding colloquial language. If you're being very loose in your language, sure, you can say that. But what it really means has nothing to do with morality. It has nothing to do with oughts at all, in any sort of sense. What it really means is it is necessary to do X in order to achieve Y. But notice that there's no ought in that sentence at all. It's strictly a descriptive. If you want this, you have to do that. But there's nothing about you ought to do this or you ought to do that in that sentence. Now, in colloquial language, we phrase it in such a way that we say, you ought to do this if you want to do that. But that's actually just us being informal. It's not precise language.
I still don't really see the distinction. I mean, the way I see it, it's no more different than saying if I want to be hygienic, I ought to wash my hands. Because not washing your hands would be counterproductive to trying to be hygienic.
So here's the difference. Using strict language, when you say if I want to be hygienic, I ought to wash my hands, what you're really saying is because I want to be hygienic, it therefore follows that I am morally obligated to do this or that which achieves cleanliness. But what I'm saying is when you have a rule system like the one you were describing earlier, what you're saying is because I want to be I keep using that word. Because I want to be hygienic, because I want to be cleanly, I have to do X, Y, Z in order to be cleansly. But that doesn't mean that I ought to do it. It just means that I have to do it if I want to be cleansly. So the first one means because you
don't have to wash your hands. It's just something you should. I mean, it's something you should do if you're trying to reach that goal. I mean, you could also achieve the same thing by just not touching anything dirty. But I'm sorry, I still don't really see the distinction here.
Yeah, I think it's vastly different. So in the first one, you're saying, again, the first one is a matter of axiological inference. In other words, because I have this desire, therefore certain actions are morally obliged, which really means my desire is a moral authority. On the other hand, the other one is just describing a precondition for some reality. It's saying, if I want to be hygienic, then I have to do this. One is saying, I ought to do this. The other is saying, if I do this, it's only because of some other action.
Right, I think that's all there is. I don't think there is any objective.
Which is fine, but that's not a moral statement.
Right, well, maybe I may not even believe in morality as you define it, because I don't think there are objective moral standards. I think that even if a God existed, its own opinions on how we should behave would be subjective.
I don't see the meaningfulness of the use of the word subjective for a being whose thoughts define the rest of reality. But yeah, I think that you're totally fair in saying that, Slang. Yeah.
If we have agency, if we have free will, then it's within our power to create contrary thoughts. I mean, Satan exists, like God created Satan, and Satan fully knows that God exists, but still has the ability to go against his will.
See, I don't believe in free will. I think that everything that happens is determined by God to occur. So when you talk about people having contrary opinions, yeah, they do, but they are only capable of having them because God has given them that capacity.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm not convinced that there is a God, but maybe free will might not even be the the best way to put it, because I'd probably agree with you in a few ways that we might not have free will. And I would say that if there is an all-powerful God that created everything, then there is no free will, and ultimately we aren't responsible for anything.
Well, I don't think that free will is indispensable to moral responsibility, but let's put that on hold for a second. Let's go back to the question of how you're answering these moral questions, and feel free to ask me questions as well, because I think that when you start having, or excuse me, when I see a lot of people having these conversations in apologetics, it seems to me that there's a lot of Christians who are really bulldogish in forcing the other person to answer their questions, but then they don't offer the chance to answer any questions that the non-believer has. So feel free to ask any questions, Lane.
Yeah, sure.
But going back to the earlier point concerning how you go about answering more questions, it's totally fair, and I totally grant you consistency there to say, well, yeah, I guess there really are no. Basically, you're saying I'm not a moral realist. I don't believe that moral judgments have any grounding in an external state of affairs. There's no truth out there beyond my mind floating around that says killing is wrong, or I ought not kill, or anything like that. There's just, I don't like killing, and therefore I avoid it. That's totally fair.
Well, no, like I said before, there are certain behaviours that promote the well-being of a society. A society where killing is permitted will not be as successful as a society that, that forbids killing.
Sure, but that doesn't have anything to do with. We just established that doesn't have anything to do with obligations. Doesn't have anything to do with oughts. It simply has to do with conditions. So yes, it is a condition. It is a precondition of successful societies that you have laws against, for example, murder. But that has nothing to do with whether or not you ought not murder, and it has nothing to do with whether or not you ought to seek a successful society in the first place.
I agree with that. I'm just saying that we can objectively say that certain behaviours are not conducive to a successful society. Whether or not you're saying we should strive to make a successful society is a whole other question. But I mean, I am a human being in a society, so I don't see any reason why I wouldn't want society to be successful.
Yeah, I totally grant you that. Yeah, I agree with you. It is definitely a precondition of the average person's survival that you have a society that is agreed against certain heinous things. Yeah, I think that if everybody went around killing nilly-willy, the world would fall apart pretty quickly. My point is then, though, excuse me, I think the issue is that when the question then is asked, why ought I to believe true propositions rather than false propositions, you run into some really big problems. Because
no, sorry, keep going. I feel like I have a way to respond to that already, but you might have more to add.
Well, go ahead and say.
Well,
what you were going to say.
I mean, true propositions have application. I mean, a proper understanding of chemistry can allow us to make medicine. A proper understanding of evolution can allow us to make predictions. Like a scientific theory that is accurate has applications, and it allows us to make accurate predictions about the future. So if you're asking why we should believe true things over false things, it's because there are uses. I mean, there are applications that come from a true understanding of reality.
Right, and I would agree that truth is useful. Truth is pragmatic. It applies to things. It has application. However, I would say, what does that have to do with the question, why ought I believe true propositions? Sure, they may apply, but how does that answer the question?
Because I'm a human being. I mean, I have, you know, a need to protect, to preserve my own survival, or at least I have a desire to preserve my own survival. So it's in my best interest that I don't believe that battery acid is medicine, for example.
But again, you're assuming that we ought to believe truths because they have application, or because they aid you in your survival. But who says? What does that matter?
Well, it doesn't. If you don't agree, then go ahead and drink battery acid.
Right. So, but what that then establishes is the obligation to believe true propositions is arbitrary. If someone wants to, they can. If someone doesn't want to, they can't. But
yeah, that's true. That's true. But if you don't, you're going to kill yourself. I mean, you don't. There's no one saying that you have to value your own. No one's telling you that you have to value your own safety. But if you don't, you'll die. So I mean, that's.
But see, this is the issue, Sling. I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you? Did you get to finish that?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. The issue with that is that it's self-defeating. When you say, when you repeat to me, and I actually, the interesting thing is, I agree with you. I think someone would totally die if they didn't think that they ought to believe true things. But here's the issue. When you say that, you're also telling me that I ought to believe it. But if truth doesn't have any intrinsic quote-unquote oughtness to it, if I'm not obliged to believe the truth merely for the fact that it's the truth, in other words, if the truth isn't inherently valuable, if it doesn't have any prescriptive power over me in terms of morality, then there is no more reason to believe your statement than there is to believe its negation.
I agree. I mean, no one's. Yeah, there is no intrinsic obligation to believe what is true, but if you want to improve your own standard of living, it's best that you do so. But I mean, there's no.
I'm saying when you say, but it's necessary to improve your standard of living, I'm saying even that is now being undone by your own system. In other words, when you say there's no reason that I ought to believe what is true, then when you go to say, but here's the consequences, well, I have no reason to believe that those are the consequences then. Even if they were true, that doesn't mean I should believe them.
Well, you don't have to believe them, but you'll quickly find out how wrong you are. I mean...
But even that, even the statement that I would quickly find out how wrong I am, I have no reason to believe that. In other words, there would be no reason to believe this or that any way or the other. Even the connection you're making between that kind of thinking and its physical consequences, like someone running into a bus, it would not follow. There would be no rational ground for any kind of inference whatsoever if the truth were not intrinsically prescriptive.
I don't understand. It sounds to me like you're saying that inductive reasoning is just as useful for reaching true conclusions as making up things.
No. What I'm saying is a precondition of rational thought is moral realism, namely that the truth is inherently prescriptive. When you go to make... Oh, Naughty, are you trying to talk, by the way? Because you are muted. I didn't want you to be... Because I would be interested in hearing what you have to say. Go ahead
I feel like this has run its course, really. I mean, I don't believe there are intrinsic oughts. I believe that if, it's just that if we have certain goals, there are ways to achieve those goals, and I believe that creating a society with as little suffering as possible is a worthwhile goal. I mean, no one's obligated to believe that, but that's my subjective opinion, and I think that most people would agree.
I would agree with you on that. I just wouldn't agree with the part where you'd said there's no intrinsic values to the state of affairs, the truth.
Right. Well,
But
well, that's because you believe in a God. But I mean, really, the only relevant question, when it comes to someone in your position, is why should I believe this God exists?
well, actually, my rationale, my argument was that if I confusing my words here. I used I used a reductio ad absurdum. In other words, I used the argument that treats your position as if it were true in order to show that if it were true, it would actually also have to be false. So, for example, we could say if square triangles existed, contradictions would obtain in reality. Premise 2, contradictions can't obtain in reality. Ergo, square circles cannot exist. That would be a reductio ad absurdum. It treats something as hypothetically true in order to show that it's absolutely impossible. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm saying
I don't see how my position. Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't see how that describes my position, but yeah.
Well, I'll run through it one more time. If we're not objectively obligated, in other words, if there's no extra mental state of affairs that prescribes that we ought to believe what is true, then there is no basis for any rational inference whatsoever. Because whenever we go to infer that something is the case, whenever we go to believe a proposition, we have no reason by which we ought to believe it. We only believe it because we want to, or for some other irrelevant justification.
Well, no, I don't think that follows. I mean, belief should be built based on the evidence that we see. I don't, I want to believe, or I might want to believe that I'm, a genius or something, but that isn't. No, I'm sorry. I don't really see where you're going.
That's fine. That's fine. And one of the beautiful things about living in the places that we live in, slang is, hey, I don't think you have to. I'm not going to force you, and I don't think you have to agree with me. I think, you're a human being. You have that freedom to believe what you want, and that's a freedom that I would fight for. So. And
I'd like to say that I don't really feel that a God dictating what is moral would necessarily make it objectively true anyway, as long as there are minds that are capable of disagreeing.
Okay, that's a good conversation. Why? So my question would be, why does disagreement imply lack of metaphysical prescription there? If I disagree with God about something, why does it make it the case that He's not correct about the state of affairs by virtue of the fact that He has an opinion on it? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I guess so. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean He's wrong because somebody disagrees, but I don't see the explanation for why He is to be automatically assumed as correct. I mean, if God, the God of the Bible says that slavery is moral, do I have to accept that as, or do people have to accept that as objectively true just because God said it? I don't think that we do.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, let's assume that Christianity is true for a second. We're just saying hypothetically here. Christianity is true. If Christianity is true, why would that be a problem?
Why would what be a problem?
If Christianity is true, why would things not be the case simply because God says they are?
Well, because I have empathy for human beings, and I can see that a human being who is owned as property and beaten when they don't work is suffering, and I can use empathy to see that I wouldn't like to be in that situation, so I can make a judgment on whether or not we should treat people that way. And the God of the Bible is specifically saying that it's okay to own people as property and to beat them into subservience, and I don't see why I should have to accept that as objectively true.
Well, given the things God says about slavery, which, by the way, I would question that He allows for needless punishment.
Well, the Old Testament permits you to beat your slave to any extent, so long as they don't die as a result of your beating within the next couple days.
That's actually not true. You're talking about Exodus 20, and if you turn, I think it's the very next paragraph, states that the owner of a slave actually has to let that slave go free if he injures the slave at all. So context is key to the interpretation. But
I'm not sure that's true, but I'll have to leave that for now, unless you want to give me a few minutes to go look at my Bible. But,
let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that God did say that He doesn't. But let's suppose that He did say you could beat a slave within an inch of his life, right? Let's suppose He did say that. And he created the world, and He decided to create humans such that when they have these social constructs of slavery and they beat each other, it's okay. So on that Christian view, what I'm asking is, where is the rational error? What's the issue? Why is there a problem there for the person the God, who defines all of creation, including all of its moral properties? What's the problem with saying, well, He says it's the case, so therefore it's the case?
Because, as I said before, I have empathy. It hurts me to see other people hurt.
But on the Christian view, it's not your empathy that decides whether something's right or wrong. It's God's making things to be right or wrong this way or that way. Right? So perhaps on a non-Christian framework, like if we weren't assuming Christianity in this hypothetical, then that might be the case. But I'm saying, assuming Christianity, there's no problem, right?
Well, no, I mean, that's just saying might makes right. I mean, that's saying God's the boss. He has the most power. He can destroy anyone who disagrees with Him. So you'd best agree with Him. That's just as subjective as anything I've put forth. I mean, what if I don't care about going to hell? If I don't care about going to hell, then there's no reason for me to obey God.
Okay, so part of the issue is that the whole subjective-objective distinction is difficult when talking about God. But I would disagree with you. It's not a might is right framework. It's more of a divine egoism. The reason it's not the big mafia in the sky, as it were, is because God's not right because He can kill you if you disagree with Him, or because He can punish you, or because He has all these powerful things He can do to you. God's right because the very concept of rightness is grounded in Him metaphysically. Whenever you use that term, you're borrowing from a framework of metaphysics that refers to Him. So, for example, when you say it is the case that we're currently talking on the computer, the reason that's true, first of all, it is true because it reflects the actual state of affairs. That is true. But the reason that it's the actual state of affairs at all is because God has determined that reality will be that way in the first place. Because God has spoken reality into existence, and part of the reality that He's spoken into existence is Slang and Jimmy will have a conversation at 3:18 a.m., at least on Pacific Coast my time, on the 25th of February, because God has defined that to happen, it's the case. And in the same way, because God has defined reality that He's created, such that it's wrong to murder someone, and it's okay to have certain constructs of slavery that He's defined in the Torah. That's why it's fine to say, well, God says this is the case, therefore it is. It has nothing to do with He'll punish you if you disagree. It has to do with the fact that all truths that have been created come from God, including those truths that are truths about morality.
No, well, I reject that premise that that something can just be objectively morally correct because God said so. I mean, even I as a human being have the ability to disagree with the decisions of the God in the Bible. So I don't see why I have to accept the idea that his way goes.
Well, if His way is correct by definition, in other words, if things are
you can't define things into existence. I mean, you can define God as perfect, or there are a lot of definitions of God, like He's infinitely just and He's infinitely merciful. Those are two contradictory descriptions, but you can't just define something into existence. You can't say, oh, part of God's definition is that He exists, and whatever He says is morally correct.
But remember, I'm not making an argument that Christianity is true given certain epistemic standards from your positions. Like, what I'm saying is, if we assume Christianity as a hypothetical, it is consistent. In other words, if Christianity is true, then whatever God says is true by the fact that He's the one who makes it true. He's the one who creates that fact into reality. So, for example, not
on moral matters. I mean, if God is omnipotent,
definitely on moral matters. I
don't agree with that. Like, if God is shaping.
But real quick, are you disagreeing because you disagree with Christianity, which is what we're hypothetically assuming, or are you disagreeing on grounds that within Christianity there is reason to disagree with that?
I'm disagreeing that God has the ability to make something objectively moral through His own opinion, because your opinion that his morals are correct is just as subjective as the opinion that they're not. You as a human being have to determine whether or not you agree with those moral decisions.
Sorry guys, my laptop got overheated and shut down.
Oh, that's okay. So Slang, again, I have to ask you, are you conversing on the assumption, are you making these statements on the assumption that Christianity is true? Because remember, that's what we're assuming. We're saying
I'm saying that. I'm saying that a moral judgment is no different to judging of a movie or a piece of art. Like what you're saying to me is basically, God thinks Forrest Gump is the best movie ever made. Therefore, Forrest Gump is the best movie ever made. But no, I might not think so. And it's exactly the same for God's moral decisions. If He says this behavior is moral, that's His opinion. That's His assessment.
Okay, considering Genesis, where God says, "Let there be light," and there was light, so on and so forth. He merely says it is the case, and it is the case because He says it is.
Yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference between talking about something that objectively exists. Like if God says trees are made of wood, and they are, that's one thing. That's not disputable. But if God says Forrest Gump is the best movie ever made, that doesn't automatically become objective truth for every person.
Okay,
just because God said it.
But I think you're missing 2 points. The first is in Genesis. God's not attributed as being correct because He sees the light and says it's there. He's attributed as being correct because He actually makes it the case. When He says, "Let there be light," there's light because He says it is. It's not that He says it is because there already is light.
Yeah, but light is a physical thing.
Okay, but that's irrelevant.
A moral
That's
assessment is abstract. It doesn't exist in the physical world, and I'm saying that no moral assessment or judgment is objective. That's the whole point. God, I
Right.
don't think that God has the ability to, if I accept that Christianity is true, it doesn't mean that his opinion on Forrest Gump being the best movie is true for everybody. It's true if he says the world is a sphere and it happens, then yes, he has control over that. But that's a physical thing that exists in objective reality. When it comes to moral assessments or judgments, it's always going to be subjective, and your opinion that God is correct is no more supported than the opinion that he's not correct.
But where are you getting that idea? Like, why are you making that distinction there from the passage? If God can create truth just from saying that it's the case, why couldn't he say it's the case that this is the best film ever, for example?
Because that's subjective. That will always be subjective. It's like.
But what does that word mean there? I don't understand what the mean.
It means that it varies from mind to mind. It means that it's
right, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter for a mind who defines the rest of reality. The distinction between subjective and objective only makes sense if your mind does not decide what the rest of reality is like. But if there's a mind that
you're using your mind to say that God defines reality. I mean, even if I accept that God creates things that exist, if God creates physical, material things that exist, that doesn't mean you can't just define God's opinion on the best movie as objective truth. I think that all values and all judgments are subjective.
Right, but what I'm saying is, we're saying hypothetically, if Christianity were true.
Yeah, I get that.
And since Christianity treats God's opinion as metaphysically authoritative, that is, when he says something is the case, the very first reason that it's the case is God. All the other reasons are secondary, and they're only there because God puts them there. So if he can create truth just by the fact that he says, let it be that way, I see no reason, I see no grounds for the distinction you're making between moral judgments and judgments about the physical world. And to further this was the second point I was going to make earlier, to further my argument there, just in the next verse he says, and it was good. And nowhere there does it say it was good because it happened to agree with him, or because he was appealing to some law outside himself that prescribed that he created a certain way. Rather, he says it was good, and the reason why it was good is because he says it is.
Yeah, well, I don't know how many more times I can say it. That's purely subjective. I mean, if you choose to define God's, opinions as objective, then that's your decision. But I don't see any reason to conclude that. I mean, sure, you can create some metaphysical argument, or you can use philosophy to try and justify it, but it's all just excuse making as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, that's fair. I think though that I've established then that if Christianity, if we assume Christianity for the sake of argument, it is consistent. It's totally consistent to say, hey, there's this being here who has created everything, and that includes that he's created the morality of everything, all the moral properties, all the moral values and obligations, and so on and so forth. However you would look at it, whether you're a virtue ethicist or a deontologist or consequentialist or whatever, all of those things come from God, and therefore his opinions on them are authoritative. That is a consistent system. Now, whether you accept that,
you're just saying it is, but you're just saying it is because it is. I mean, you still haven't really justified it.
Well, I've justified that it's consistent. I haven't.
You haven't really explained why God's judgments are objective. You're just saying that in the Christian worldview, we as human beings have to accept his authority. But
well, no. I'm saying if Christianity is true, that proposition right there, that hypothetical, is the same as saying if the God who can make reality merely by thinking it exists, they're both logically identical. In other words, I've established that on the Christian...
So no, okay. How about this then? Suppose you create a virtual reality that's close to the complexity of this universe. You have a quantum computer, and you simulate the Big Bang, and you create a space-time continuum with planets and stars, and there are life forms inside this. Are you saying that because you created this universe, whatever you say would automatically be moral? So if you just start burning the life forms in this universe for your own amusement, that would be moral because you say so. I mean, that's
Nadia
the
left
same
the chat.
situation.
Did you want to say something, John?
Nadia left the chat.
Yeah, she has to go. She's going to do a hangout at 4. This hangout is actually ending, and it's supposed to end in 1 minute, but I would like to keep talking for just a little bit longer, just to because I want to make sure. Slang.
Yeah, I know. You both were talking. You were so serious, you both. I was just playing with Nadia.
Yeah, we probably should have let them get involved in the discussion a bit more.
Well, to be honest, Nadia was on the phone for most of it, so there's nothing really much we could do.
No, she never talks actually.
But would you say that if you created a universe yourself, that any decision you make and would be objectively true for every being within that universe?
I think the question is a little bit complex. So let me ask a different one, and then I'll ask you if you think that that's okay if I ask that one instead. Is that fair?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So let's say that I create a video game that acted like a virtual reality. That is, one could sort of put themselves into it, and it would seem extremely real. Whether or not it were actually as complex as this world or not would be irrelevant. But you would be interacting with video game creations. You would just be like a single player. You would pop yourself into this virtual reality and start playing.
Well, are there beings in this reality?
Huh?
Are there beings in this reality with awareness?
Well, I would assume not, because I don't think that that's possible.
Okay.
What?
But I'm saying if it were a video game, I would say yeah, absolutely. Or if it were a book, or if it were any kind of creation about a fantasy world, yeah, I think it would be absolutely consistent for the person who's writing the book to decide that in this world X, Y, Z is moral.
But it is not real because you don't have life.
It's really hard to decide morality when we're not dealing with thinking beings. I mean, I don't know if when you're talking about a video game character, I don't think there is any moral behavior. You can't be immoral to a rock, for example.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I don't think that your position can actually substantiate that claim, Slang. But I do agree with you. I don't think that you can mistreat a rock, and I don't think that a human is a rock that you can't mistreat it.
Okay, I will leave the chat. Before I leave the chat, I want to say something. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John. We're gonna wrap up pretty soon, anyways.
Yeah. If you both guys talk like this for like a year or 10 years, you'll end up with the same thing, definitely. Because nobody's going to agree with others, because it's in the heart, it's not mind. You thought in your heart that you will do this thing, and that guy has his heart in a different way. Mind doesn't matter. Whatever you say, he's going to reject anyway at the end. And same to you.
Well, I was once a Christian and I changed my position, so I don't think that's accurate.
You
I
think
have
you'll
clear,
change again? You might change again?
well, I know that I'm capable of changing my position.
So you're saying you will not change, definitely.
Well,
I
but
don't
no
know.
more.
If someone makes a decent argument and shows me evidence, they would probably change my mind.
But more importantly, I don't think that it's up to me, John, to change Slang's mind. My job is to be a human being, to offer friendship, um, to offer whatever kind of support I can. In this case, I'm best suited to offer exactly what Slang is talking about, offer arguments for the case of Christianity. But in terms of an evangelical conversation, my job is simply to convict Slang of the truth. Whether Slang wishes to accept it or not is not up to me, and whether he is capable of change, I don't think is up to him, because I think it's up to God
There's a
whether or not.
problem in there. You cannot convict anyone unless the Holy Spirit convicts.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that the Holy Spirit, I don't see what reason to think that it exists.
Yeah, and that's fair coming from your point of view. I think though that I mean we've only had one conversation. I hope to have conversations with you again, but let's sort of bring this conversation to an end. So I'll make a point about this hypothetical, but maybe I'll take it to a further extreme, and then I'd like to hear what you would say to that, Slang, and then perhaps we can end the conversation with whatever comments you have there.
Yeah. Well, why is it that you couldn't answer the question about if you were able to create a universe that was close to the complexity of ours with with aware sentient beings inside it?
I can, and I'll do so actually if you want me to, but I think it's confusing to answer that question. If I could create such a world with thinking beings, see you later, John. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Yeah. Bye.
Later, John.
If I could create such a world, would the thinking beings be humans? Like, would they?
They could be. Yeah. Okay. In this hypothetical, say that they're pretty much human.
Then no, I don't think that I could dictate a reality over this creation. No.
Oh, I see. Because you consider yourself equal to those beings, but all right, they're not human then. They're self-aware. They're beings. They're technologically advanced beings like us, but they're not humans.
Yeah, then I would say I would treat them the same way I would any animal.
Okay, so are you saying that there's no immoral behavior when it comes to animals? Like you can't mistreat an animal?
Oh no, I think you can. But what I'm saying is, if we're talking about sentient beings that are like us but aren't human, I'm kind of tempted to say, well, they're either higher than us, in which case that would be pretty evident, and it would be somehow made evident. If, for example, let's say that I came into contact with angels, it would be very easy for an angel to tell me that he's an angel and I should treat him this way or that way because he's an angel. That would be very easy for an angel to do. So if these are technologically advanced beings, if they're worthy of being treated under some system of morality, presumably it should be very easy for them to communicate that. Otherwise, I would just assume that they're on the same level with animals.
Right. Oh, the reason I brought up the hypothetical was because I was trying to see whether or not just the act of creating a universe makes your opinion objectively true for everything within that universe, and I'm not convinced that it does. I mean, you can.
If we're talking, well, real quick,
define
let me interject because this is really key. When you use the word creation, if you're talking about creation, like the creation, as in terms of you can create a universe just as of saying let it be, just as of thinking it into existence, as it were, just as of speaking it into existence, then yes, you definitely could dictate all the moral rules in it. Yes.
Yeah, I don't accept that, because to me morality is the product of a mind.
Right, but I don't think that that's the Christian view. In which case, what I'm saying is that's fine, and we can talk about that if you want. But if we're assuming the Christian position, that's not even relevant, because the Christian position is that morality is created by God and is therefore defined by Him. All moral facts come from God, just like any physical or mental or whatever fact comes from God.
I'm not sure I even accept that. I think that I could accept the Christian worldview and still be of the opinion that that morals and values are all subjective. I mean, according to the Christian worldview, it's God is the highest authority, but as I said before, like, his favorite movie doesn't automatically become the best movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've established that that's not the case, so I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah, I suppose. All right, well, yeah, good talk.
Yeah, really good talk. I added you to my circle slang, so I hope we get to chat again. This has been really good.
Yeah, sure. Catch you later.
Take care, man.